Hey guys, my name's Crystal Kenny, and I'm in love with creating. All things artistic and imagination involved. I'm an American girl who chased her creative dreams all the way to Paris, France, making a living using photography. This podcast takes you inside the stories of all the artsy folks I've met along the way and gives you that extra push to discover your creative gifts. The desire to create is deeply inside each and every one of us, and I give you the tools and inspiration to find a new way of living a more creative life. This is La Vie Creative, the podcast. Today on the show, I interviewed Dr. Angela Stienne. Angela is originally from France, but spent a lot of time traveling all over studying Egyptology. She's a researcher and author, and we talk all about her new book, Mummy Stories, as well as the ethics around museums and mummified bodies today. So welcome to the show, Angela. I'm very happy to have you here today. I have had Claudine Hemingway telling me for months I need to interview this wonderful researcher, scientist, amazing author. So thanks for coming on today.
Well, I'm so delighted to have a chat with you today.
Now, I want to go back to the beginning. Tell me a little bit about your story. You are originally from France. Tell me a little bit about your upbringing and what brought you into the research you do today.
So I grew up in the west suburb of Paris, and I lived there until about 19. And basically, when I was young, I decided that I wanted to be an Egyptologist. Now, I'm probably not the first person to say that, and I think like many people who have, childhood dreams, a lot of people thought it would pass, and well, I didn't. So I just really became absolutely fascinated with ancient Egypt, and I wanted to learn everything. And I think that a big factor in this was that I was only a few, train stops away from the Louvre, and that played such a major role in my.
Definitely. And what made you think to even do that? Did you see a movie, read a book? What made you so invested in Egyptology and mummies?
I don't really have that memory of that one moment where I was like, this is what I'm going to do. But I do know that when we're about 11, 12, so first year of middle school in the French curriculum, we learned a bit about ancient Egypt. So I think that must have played a role, but I really think that being able to go to the Louvre, and my parents would take me to museums, really played a fundamental role because it's just such a big collection. So I don't know what the origin moment is, like the precise day it happened, but I do know that from 13 on, there was nothing else going on in my life. It was all I would talk about, all I would do, all the, books I would buy. Christmas was all about, souvenirs. And so I even went to Egypt when I was 16. So it really just consumed my life, which was not a bad thing. For me, at least. I don't know about everyone around me.
About your parents, or what did we do? Where did we go wrong? And so talk a little bit about your work. So when you were 19, you moved to England to continue your education, to get a PhD. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I went to La Sorbonne, actually, when I finished my high school, to do art history and archaeology. But I just really wanted to jump into the topic of Egyptology, and the way that the French and the British systems are is really quite different. So in England, you could really specialize right away. And I found that they had a degree in Egyptology, so I applied, and I had I was not, raised bilingual, so I had a pretty good level of English, but for a French person, I do not know what that says. But I applied, and I just gave it a try, and somehow I got in. So sort of very rapidly, my life changed, and I found myself with very heavy suitcases going to university in London to do an undergrad.
Oh.
Well, it was supposed to be a first year. I was only going for sort of a year, kind of a year abroad, but I wanted to study, so I enrolled in the first year of a degree. And then I ended up doing 7 years of studies in England.
Wow. So you really enjoyed it then?
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, it was just, I've always been very transparent. The first few years were so difficult because it was really in-depth, really intense. And my level of English was really not there. So I really did struggle. But also the way of teaching and studying in England is very different. It's very It's very analytical and it's very much about developing your own thinking. What France has, especially in undergrad, this way where you learn things by heart, which is completely different. So
Hmm.
I really struggled the first few years. And then in my third year of undergrad, I think it clicked where I was like, okay, I'm staying. This is what I want to do. So I moved then to a different region in the UK to study at the University of Leicester. And that's where I did a master's degree and then a PhD, but in museum studies, but still focusing on Egyptology collections.
Wow. And so does England have the biggest collection of Egyptian museum there? Like in the world, they have the most things, correct?
Yeah, they do have a very substantial collection. Although the Louvre does as well, and so it depends on sort of how you look at it and also which specialism you look at it. So what I'm
Yeah.
studying Egyptian mummified bodies in museums, they do have more human remains on display, but it's also not
Yeah.
just in London. So places like Manchester, Liverpool have very large collections. Oxford, of course, Cambridge. So there's just a lot there, and I think both countries have a lot due to their history, their past with Egypt, with modern Egypt.
Mhm.
And that very much influences it. But in terms of studying Egyptology in Europe, England is very much is a very big place for this.
Yeah, that was a great place for you to study. And your research is really looking at the intersection of museums, bodies, and ethics. So talk a little bit about that and your feelings about, we're literally putting human remains on display. How do you feel about that? What did your research show you?
So a lot of my work and a lot of my research has been sort of practice based. So I try to really go and talk to people and understand and why they go to museums, why they go to see human remains in museums. And then I try to bring sort of the historical research that I have done, which demonstrates that actually there's a lot of, very complicated history, very controversial history, a lot of sort of topics that people don't really know about, the intersection between human remains and race studies and the narratives in museums. So I really have been spending a lot of time trying to explore with people why we go to museums, why human remains are in museums, what ethics is, how
Hmm.
do we talk with the public about ethics, about is it right? Is it wrong? Should it happen? Why did it happen? So I don't really offer a an answer. I'm not here to tell you that it's wrong to go and see human remains in museums. I'm here to take you on a journey that hopefully will lead you to decide whether you think it's right or wrong. And I think in many ways, some of the, the data that's there, some of the historical records, some of the contemporary, perceptions and reactions will might lead you in a way where at least you will question whether we should have those displaced bodies in museums today. But a lot of my work is really about
Hmm.
how do we find creative ways to engage with these questions so that we don't really have this it's right, it's wrong, I care, I don't care, and a lot of the sort of duality that we see especially in the press today when talking about restitution, repatriation, colonial history and so on.
Colonization. Yeah. Yeah. And what were some things that surprised you in your research? What were some things that you didn't expect to find?
I think there are two things. On the historical side, I think the extent of the involvement of scientific researcher that we would call scientific researcher now, but curators in natural histories and researcher in natural histories, especially in Paris, and the way that the Natural History Museum was very much had a very important role in shaping perceptions of the Egyptian mummies, but also doing a lot of race studies and very uncomfortable today studies on Egyptian mummified bodies. I don't think we would expect the Egyptian mummy to be so involved in conversations about race, and at least I didn't when I did
Hmm.
my studies. And that is, I think, a sort of a very monumental topic to talk about. It's something that's so important because it sort of roots, it embeds the conversations into much bigger conversations about restitution, repatriations, racism, narratives in museums.
Hmm.
So that was a very big discovery for me. I mean, I did my PhD very young, so there's a lot that I just had never had time to explore. That was very
Hmm.
fundamental for me in reshaping. my knowledge, but also in realizing that, we think about Egyptian mummies and Egyptian material culture as being in archaeology museum, but actually a lot, if not most, of the research was happening in natural history and in scientific circles. So that was sort of the big thing.
Yeah.
And then in a more
Yeah.
contemporary, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
I think in a different sort of strand in the contemporary world, what I've learned the most, what perhaps surprised me the most, is that we're still trying, and especially the general public, to reckon with what an Egyptian mummy is and to understand whether it is an object, whether it is a body. I still get asked a lot of the time if there's someone inside the mummy,
Mm-hmm.
which is just fascinating for
Wow.
me, that this way that we're still that I think that it's what makes the Egyptian mummy so specific, so curious to people, is the way that it has sort of escaped conversations on human remains in museums, and the way that it has been commodified and objectified to a point where we're no longer sure what it is. That for me, it's
Yeah.
fascinating because it's just such a great way to have, what I call those conversations about museums, bodies, and ethics, and how our relationship to other bodies shape our interactions in museums.
Yeah, it is fascinating, and it's one of the kind of the only time I guess you would see a human body in a museum. Really, is like it's people are fascinated by, coming to see these things and knowing the history. But then it is interesting to question the ethics, like how would the Egyptians feel about that after they went through so much work to put them where they put them, when and the afterlife and the things that they believed in. And once you start bringing up these topics to the general public, does it kind of change their ideas about what they're looking at?
I I really believe that if we ask questions, then we're already reframing the way that we see things. So I would like to say that every time I give a talk, people leave and they transform. That would
Yeah.
be the aim, suppose. But actually, I'm not here to reshape your thinking. I am really here to help you think differently. And it doesn't mean that
Hmm.
you're going to think the way
Hmm.
that I think. And in fact, the way that I think changes a lot of the time. I think that's a beautiful thing about being a researcher and a practitioner, is that I always sort of transform the way that I look at things myself. I don't think that I have all the answers, and I think that any researcher that thinks they have all the answers, they're probably not the researchers you want to listen to. But I always tell people that if when they leave the room, when I give a talk or I do a workshop or a tour, um, if they leave having more questions, then my job's done, because then they become
Hmm.
curious. And if they become curious about something that they're so used to, the Egyptian mummy is just so familiar in Europe, in Northern America. Like, it's part of popular culture. It's part of our museums. It's part of the sort of imaginary. If you become curious about something that you've never really asked questions about before, then you're going to do that in sort of different areas of your life. You're going to start questioning, assumptions and preconceived
Hmm.
ideas, and what matters and what doesn't matter, what is right, what is wrong. And so that for me is really the joy of engaging with people. So I cannot tell you how the ancient Egyptians would feel about being in a museum, because the concept of a museum as it is today obviously was not did not exist. But also because I cannot speak for
Hmm.
the dead, I have some sort of ideas and inclinations about what some of the beliefs were, but I cannot answer those questions, and I also cannot tell you how you should feel about human remains. But hopefully, through the writing, and that's why I wrote the book, or the talks and the tours, people start to come to just new understandings, and often new conclusion, and they start to wonder whether something they've always seen, which is what most people say.
Hmm.
It's always been there. I've always seen an Egyptian mummy. My, family used to take me to the museum. If they start to reconsider why it's here, then it's wonderful, because it just makes people think more, and question more, and engage more. And that's my favorite part
Yeah.
of doing talks and having the Q&As and the engagements.
Yeah, the curiosity.
Exactly.
And tell us a little bit more about your book, Mummified.
So mummified is really the sort of not the ending, but the result of a project that I have been running since 2017, which is called Mummy Stories, which is a project that I created during my PhD. And the reason I created was very much because I kept being told that everyone loves mummies. We don't talk about mummies in conversations about ethics because everyone loves mummies. And I thought, okay, well, that sounds a bit, I'm not sure everyone loves mummies, but actually a lot of people that I would take on tours in museums were like, oh, I don't want to see, dead bodies. I feel really uncomfortable. It just doesn't sound right. Or there were a lot of people
Mhm.
in my degree that had never seen an Egyptian mummy because they came from countries that just don't have them on display. I
Yeah.
don't have permanent collections. So all of a sudden I thought, well, actually, is it really that everyone loves mummies, or is it that people do not have a platform to express their opinion if they're not the general opinion or what we think of as the
Mhm.
general opinion? So I started to invite individuals to share their stories, and it was just a wonderful project where individuals from all around the world will send messages and say, well, actually, I saw an Egyptian mummy when I was a child, and this has, created my passion and turned me into an Egyptologist or museum curator. But then I would get people that are like, I really think this is wrong. It's unethical. It's against my, religious belief. Or people would say, I've never seen an Egyptian mummy. I've only seen it in movies, but, I just arrived in England and I've just seen one and I feel really conflicted. It's just wonderful diversity, and
Mhm.
definitely countered the idea that everyone loves mummies. So I would collect all these stories, and then I started to do, workshops, and even through my PhD and then my postdoctoral research, which I did in London, and I just collected all of those stories, and doing all those talks were wonderful. But of course, when the pandemic hit, all of this had been put to a halt, and I thought it was the occasion to sit down and actually write a book of those stories. So it's very much a journey. It goes through sort of a historical journey, but it also goes through my personal and professional journey, and it's what I do when I, explain things to you right now. It's very much about asking questions and adding layers and layers to the existing narrative so that hopefully when people end the journey of reading the book, they're like, their perspective is not, as I said, completely transformed, but actually they have more questions. They look at things differently. It's been really wonderful having people sending messages and saying they've read the book and then they went right away to the British Museum to go look at the room differently. And that's just for me,
Mhm.
that's the reason to write a book. And they were like, I looked at things completely differently. I started to read the labels that I hadn't paid attention to. I wanted to look for the cues and the information that's missing, and looking at how people are engaging. And that's for me, it's so wonderful.
Yeah, it's changing people's mindset and like you said, getting them to ask more questions and get more curious. That's a really beautiful thing to do for anybody. And talk a little bit about when you work with museums and curation. I mean, sometimes you help museums curate and talk about what that process is and how you decide all of that.
Yeah, so I aside from doing historical research and then working on mummy stories and mummified, I've been doing projects on co-production. So it's the idea of creating exhibitions with communities,
Hmm.
and reframing narratives. So I did that first in Leicester, which is the city where I lived in England, working with refugees and asylum seekers in Leicester, redoing the labels of one of the galleries that existed at the time. And that was just a really human, really wonderful project where the museum sort of let us take over. And it really got me thinking about the power of co-production. It was an award-winning exhibition. It was incredibly emotional. It has a catalog that's still online that people can check. And so another project that was born during the pandemic is a project that I run now at the same time as Mummy Stories, and that's called the Lime Museum. And it's a virtual
Hmm.
museum that is about the lived experience of invisible illnesses and disabilities. And that's another, so the museum's bodies and ethics applies to this project too, where I try to explore ways that invisible illnesses and disabilities have or have not been represented in the museum historically. So, especially looking at medical collections, but also today and looking at accessibility in museums. And part of this was curating an exhibition that we did online during the pandemic, which was just a really nice also community building moment, but that we also did
Yeah.
in person in Leicester last year. It's called The Materiality of
That,
Invisibility, and it's a flat lay exhibition.
and what inspired you to create that?
So I've always been sort of very practice based. I've always loved creating, and I think that's what also led me to go into museum studies rather than staying just in Egyptology. But this project is also born from my own lived experience of Lyme disease, which gives the name to the museum being called the Lyme Museum,
Mhm.
and my own experience walking sort of at the intersection of what we call medical humanities. So a lot of the work
Yeah.
that I have done, because I haven't just done research in archives, but I've actually been sort of I've also experienced walking and researching human remains in museums. So working with collections of over thousands of bodies that are in museums and often in medical collections. And so that
Hmm.
sort of physicality really uh, pushes you to think about bodies and their materiality, but also being in a medical collections where we frame what medical history is and what being ill and not ill is, has really pushed me to sort of
Hmm.
take my personal life, medical life, into my professional
Yeah.
life and wonder and sort of see where the intersection of this is. And actually, the lot of it is intersecting with research on human remains and with mummy stories. So I find myself sometimes duplicating articles into the two projects because the intersection is a lot stronger than I imagine. And in fact, a lot of debates at the moment are about human remains, disability, displacement, consent, and so on, and it intersects between the two projects. And so a lot of my work is about giving people a voice, and it's about giving them a
Yeah.
platform. So a lot of my work is digital, but the exhibition is both digital and physical, and it was very much about how do we give a voice to a group of people that have a shared lived experience of illness and disability, but that also often have been excluded in society. And we saw that even stronger during the pandemic. And how do we do a project that's visual and creative and that's not re-traumatizing? And so we used art-based methods. So doing flat lays, when people take
Hmm.
photographs of objects and people started to send flat lays of the objects they have around them that represent their lived experience. So instead of having to sort of
Hmm.
write lengthy or doing interviews, that's what we used. And we ended up with a sort of a very brightly colored, but at the same time, sort of, this dichotomy between it was just the so colorful that it was joyful. And then it talks about such, complex history and lived experiences. And having this on a wall in Leicester last year was just incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I saw some of them on your Instagram. It's really
Mhm.
beautiful. And like you said, colorful and not so sad like you would expect. Like it was interesting to
I think
see
a
these
lot
flat
of
lays and I
a lot of my work, even with mummy stories, has always been how do we make these conversations accessible, but accessible in an exciting way where people want to just look at it. And so I was really, really keen with my book that it would look pretty, which sounds a bit silly.
yeah,
I'm talking about ethics, but I just wanted an object that people would want to have. And I think with the exhibition, I wanted something that people would want to look at because a lot of the framing for difficult conversations is pretty bleak, and it's very sort of, you're going to
yeah,
have to read this entire article and it's going to be heavy. And we do not
yeah,
reach people that do not feel concerned by a topic if we just make it so, inaccessible, so heavy. And I'm not taking the heaviness of the topic out of it. The things I talk about, whether
yeah.
it's in the book, whether it's on the Lyme Museum or in Mummy Stories, they are hard topics that we need to confront. But I always try to find creative ways where, people want to engage with it. And so one of my, favorite example is that I once went to give a talk about human remains in a pub in England. It was just like, and it was basically people were unaware of it and it was a sort of a separate room. So if you don't want to listen to it, you don't have to, but people could just walked
Yeah.
in and with a pint and just like listen to it. And it was one of the most wonderful Q&A I've had because, those are not people that would have actually gone to listen to a talk about this. So, there's always creative ways to
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah, I love it. I love that, you're finding ways to, make people want to be engaged, make people want to learn. Because, like you said, it can be kind of bleak sometimes. So we need to find ways to get people involved and thinking. And since you've worked with so many different museums and on the topic of ethics and human remains, have you found that these ideas are changing for the museums, for the curators, for the directors? Are they changing the way they think about these things?
I think the thing about the museum is that it's not an easy place to reshape. And it's one
Yeah.
of those, it's a monument in every sense of a monument. And so it is quite hard to change things. And while we do a lot behind the scenes, seeing it translated into displays, it takes time.
Hmm.
And so that's why a lot of my work now, and it kind of has been a shift, is talking more to people that are outside, so the public, the people that do workshops, educators, and so on, and trying to change the way that they approach things, rather than trying. I
Hmm.
was really keen when I was younger. I was like, this label is terrible, I'm gonna get them to change it. It's been 10 years, it's not gonna
Yeah.
happen. But actually, if visitors now, like that person that messaged me, go to museums and actually think, well, actually there's something missing in that label, I think my job is
Yeah.
partly done. It's realizing that changing institutions, and especially in countries like France, where it's very hard, as you will know, to sort of get
Yeah.
institutional change, and especially
Yeah.
on so-called contested topics. I think that actually, if it's a lot easier to reach into society and to make people want to ask more questions and to think differently, and also to look into art spaces, to universities, to teaching, to that those environments where it's a lot easier to arrange those conversations. It doesn't mean that that we should give up on changing museums, but it also depends on what kind of museums, the size, the amount of people involved, the history of the institution. It's a big challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we know France isn't big on change, so that's one of the reasons it makes it beautiful, but also sometimes difficult to be here because change is not easy, especially in institutions, like you said.
Yes,
And how would you define creativity in your own words?
that's really interesting. I think, for me, creativity is the way that you translate ideas and the way that you exchange them with people. So
Hmm.
a lot of my, I think, for a long time I just wasn't really sure how to explain what I was doing, because I was trying to be, what I'm either a historian or I'm a curator, or I'm a researcher. And I realized that what I do is just creativity, and whatever the topic or the foundation of it, it's the way that you translate it. So it took me a really long time to say, well, actually, I'm a writer. And even when I had the book in my
Hmm.
hands, I thought, well, yeah, but I'm actually a historian, and writing is the method of translating what I do so that it reaches people. So I,
Yeah.
I think that's creativity to me.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's sometimes really hard to define ourselves, and we feel like we have to kind of pigeon our hole into one thing,
Mm.
like I'm just a painter, I'm just a writer. But in fact, all of us are multifaceted, multi-talented, and that's okay too. Like you don't
No,
it's okay to want to
absolutely.
like different.
I also think that, with having a background in academia, it's kind of like for a pound to, still to think about creative ways to do things, because academia is very coded. And and
Yeah.
and so, when I started to do my websites, or when I started to teach social media, it was before it was, sort of accepted. So it was kind of like, well, you're not really
Mhm.
doing research, are you? Is Mommy Stories is just a blog? And but actually, for me, it was just the way that I translated the research behind the scene. And it's wonderful now to see that there's so many young researchers on social media sharing their everyday in the archives, and sort of breaking this barrier. Um, but
Mhm.
creativity was just, it wasn't, you were either a creative person or you were an academic and a researcher. And so I really think that this is changing, and
Yeah.
it's really nice to witness.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you keep your work evolving and keeping yourself inspired to do new things, to try new things, to write more books?
I think that it's, what we talked about earlier, it's curiosity. So it's
Mhm.
trying things that, don't always work. I actually had a proposal for a very different book before I wrote this one, and I worked on it for a year. That didn't really work, and we don't really, talk a lot about uh, these tryouts, and we often sort of
Yeah.
frame them as failure. And actually, not writing that first book was a wonderful thing. It made me
Yeah.
realize that that's not what I wanted to do. So I keep trying to do things. It doesn't mean that in the everyday, or like if you look at a month, you're kind of always wondering, what have I done? But trying new things,
Yeah.
even if it doesn't lead to sort of a physical thing, is always so important. So I always try to stay curious. I'm doing an online, certification this year where I'm learning a bit more tech things which are really out of my comfort zone. It's nice to be back at school, and I always try to just explore more. And I think that the nice things about being back in Paris after being away for so long is that I have this kind of new eyes that you have when you move to a new city, even though that's where I grew up. And getting to
Yeah.
explore and meet new people and networking. I think one of the things that really keeps me creative is that since the pandemic, it is a lot easier to engage with people around the world. There's a lot more people that have
Yeah.
joined social media, but also things like Zoom or the conversation we're having today. And it does mean that sort of the different perspectives and seeing what other people are doing around the world is just brilliant. I absolutely love having, conversations with people around the world and seeing what they're doing differently and exploring a lot
Yeah.
more very different practice. I love studying, but when you're studying, you're a bit in a bubble where everyone's doing
Yeah.
archive and library and research and talking about methodology. And so you
Yeah.
come back in the real world and you're like, what do I talk about if I'm not talking about my methodology and my research framework?
Yeah.
And so meeting people that are doing things with similar interests but completely differently, it's just so eye-opening. It's wonderful. I really encourage people to do that. It does put you in a spot where you're like, I have no idea how to talk to people in a normal setting, how to talk about my research. A lot of the time people ask me what my book is about, and I'm like, human remains. And then I'm like, God, that was not a good way to introduce it, when you're outside. And so I always think, and then they think I don't know what my book is about. It is it's a wonderful exercise to make you think about what you do and what others do differently, and to
Yeah.
reframe constantly. And it's what you were saying. We always, have this tendency to want to put ourselves and others in boxes. And if you can always rethink what you're doing, it's just wonderful. It's a bit unsettling at the beginning, but it's a good kind of unsettling where you're like, well, actually, I could do this completely differently. So yeah, it's
Yeah.
it's, it's
Just
exciting.
like starting the book. Yeah, exactly. And like you said, bouncing ideas off other people, being inspired by other people, because it's so easy to get in these little dark holes of the internet or just staring at screens or whatever. But we got to get out and talk to each other, whether it's online or in person, to really get that energy going and to keep evolving and help each other in a lot of ways. And what future projects are you most excited about? You're working on a second book right now.
Yeah, so I think I'm definitely working on a second book, but a much slower pace. It's a lot more
Uh-huh.
reflective. Also, my current book was based on my PhD thesis, so I had a lot of material. I want this one to be very different, a lot more creative, a lot. I don't really know what it's going to look like, but I have all these ideas, and it's very exciting. Outside of this, I'm really excited to really settle in France and set up as a consultant, and I have now a carte de guide conférencier, so I can be a tour guide. So I'm excited to explore the history of
Wonderful.
Egyptology in Paris, and that's something that I think is missing a lot. And there's not a lot of publications and research into what I like to call sort of a geography of Egyptology in Paris. So how every street has this connection,
Yeah.
and I like mapping places. So I think that's what I'm going to be
Yeah.
doing this autumn.
I think that's a great idea. I'm excited to see all of it. And where can people connect with you online and buy your book and learn more?
So online, they can find me on social media. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, and I'm on my website. And everyone can find all those links on my website, which is angelastien.com. and mummystories.com.
Perfect.
So they're the two places. And my book is available online. It's also in the library of the Musée de l'Homme if you want to have a little look. And I can order it for you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much, Angela. It was wonderful to talk to you today, and I can't wait to see what you do next.
Thank you. Well, I can wait to exchange with more people, in person or online. Bounce ideas, as we say.
Thanks so much for tuning in to La Vie Creative. You can find more information on MissParisPhoto.com. And if you enjoyed this show, please feel free to share and spread the word for all my creative guests. We have the power to help them to keep doing what they love. See you next time.